Now let us look at the poem which you have before you in somewhat greater detail. This poem consists of 9 stanzas. Always look hard at the arithmetic of a poem. For poems are deeply driven by a principle of rational order that tends to manifest itself. However humble you may feel that manifestation to be, it is also powerful arithmetically. This poem consists of 9 stanzas, the first being a proem, that is to say, an introductory stanza, which in a more formal epic poem, this poem is an epic poem, would be called an invocation, the establishment of the relationship to the principle by which the empowerments of this poetry are obtained. That principle being, in this case, the fair lady. The state of affairs in history is the falling that is always going on, and the power of rescue which is inherent in the capacity of the children by reason of the already written words of the game to establish a relationship to a principle above and beyond the world in which they live, my fair lady. Each stanza of the poem ends with the invocation, my fair lady, and those words enable action, as the child says. When you get to my fair lady, you catch someone. The imperative, build it up, is addressed to her, and the utterance of her name makes the will to build effective in the act of catching and choosing. Poetry is the voice of another and contains inside it always the story about speaking to the abstract other, the principle of poetry, which intends to enable speech and therefore relationship in this world of social persons, in which relationships are always falling and failing, and which the speaker in the poem goes about to renew. Now, the technical name for address to the abstract other, when we wish to refer to it as a rhetorical form, O lady, O muse, is apostrophe. And I want to secure that word, which may be strange to some and well known to others. Apostrophe, A-P-O-S-T-R-O-P-H-E. That's the figure of address to the absent other, O muse, right? O lady, avenge, O Lord, and so on. It is upon the establishment of relationship through the figure of apostrophe, addressed to the absent other, that access to a power other than the power of natural speech is obtained. It is always present or implied at the beginning of a poem, and the language of any given poem is regulated in response to the manner in which the term thus addressed is characterized. The technical name for address to the abstract other as a rhetorical form is apostrophe, A-P-O-S-T-R-O-P-H-E, which signifies the turning away, apo, from the other at hand toward the abstract other who is absent and whose difference from the social other is her power toward the social other, as the difference of poetry from the natural order of language constitutes its power toward the natural order of language, its poetic knowledge, which is always new. We must ask in the course of our concern, what's the meaning of the word fair? What characteristic of the lady is expressed by the word fair? Perhaps fair signifies the acknowledgement of an agreement upon the social principle of the human form. What does beauty mean? What does it mean to assign fairness to power? I wish to suggest to you that fairness signifies agreement upon what constitutes, as I say, the social form of the person, and it's to this source of agreement upon what constitutes the social form of a person, what we call fair. That address becomes effective. In each of the 9 stanzas, then, all identical in structure, consists of 3 lines, identical in structure throughout the poem, followed by the empowering apostrophe which invokes the lady, changeless in all respects, for the lady has empowering abstractness is identical with the principle of structure itself. Now, rhyme is a principle of difference, identical vowels but different consonants, producing different words in structured relationships. The poems which we study encounter social reality on the edge of catastrophic disappearance, of workable and constructive difference, and you will note the poem called My Fair Lady, rhyme disappears. The poem called My Fair Lady is built upon a counter principle to the principle of rhyme. Stones, 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 away, 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 steel, steel, steel is not rhyme. It is the counter principle to the principle of rhyme. It is the function of rhyme to resist repetition, to press elements apart without disavowing their relationship. The opposite of rhyme is not its absence, unrhyming words, which is the productive state of natural language, but rather the opposite of rhyme, its contradiction, is the repetition of the same word. You understand? Rhyme signifies and enacts difference within likeness. The opposite of rhyme is not its absence, because that's the normally empowered state of natural language, as I have said. The opposite of rhyme is redundance, the repetition of the same. That is the primal terror which rhyme permits us to postpone. Rhyme produces difference consistent with relationship. Rhyme is a form, therefore, of love. The disappearance of rhyme and its replacement by redundance, repetition of the same, redundance which is not human because it cannot say more. The repetition of the same, as in down, 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 stone, stone, stones, signifies the catastrophe which is figured in the falling bridge and which the children experience as the motive to the singing game. Rhyme enters this poem only at the conclusion of stanzas 3, 5, 7, and 9. Check it out, where the lady, in her effective absence, reconciles the abstract remote and the particular at hand in the difficult rhyming consonants of lady, away, thereby recovering structure at the point of its material collapse. All poems, like all language, appeal to time, unfold in time, represent time and narrative, as natural language does in the sentence which always contains the timekeeper and indicator, the verb. But the struggle to make time meaningful is driven by the fearful expectation that all time may be the same and therefore meaningless. Heaven, perhaps, or hell, but not Georgetown. In terms relevant to the structure of the poem, the struggle in the poem is to keep the abstract principle of identity which maintains the world. In this poem, 7 syllables to a line, each line beginning with a stress and ending with a stress, from abolishing rather than sustaining the difference in the human world which is required for its productive life. This poem makes 2 epic sweeps of the human history of materials and construction, beginning each time with the earth in something like its natural form. In stanzas 2 and 3, check it out, sticks and stones. In stanzas 6 and 7, bricks and clay, and ending each time with materials from the earth, also from the earth in a higher state of manufacture or refinement. Stanzas 6 and 7, bricks and clay. Stanzas 8 and 9, silver and gold. Each pair of stanzas commands construction. Build it, build it, build it. And each command is both executed and defeated by the truth of wearing, washing, rusting, and human betrayal. The problem of the poem is the overcoming of time, wearing, washing, rusting. Or more precisely, the problem of the poem is the overcoming of the enemy of the built world by putting the singing game in service of that struggle, for the singing game is founded on the absent power of relationship, which by its absence is invulnerable to time, my fair lady, and by its privilege of perpetual renewal, its inherent generosity is not subject to scarcity. The value of the poem and all objects of its kind is that it is by the principle of its nature not subject to scarcity. That's very important to my mind. The value of the poem and all objects of its kind, what kind? I have to specify that, is that it is by the principle of its nature not subject to scarcity. The singing game, London Bridge is falling down, seems in actuality infinitely distributed in the human community, as it is already known ahead of time by each of us. I observed at the beginning of this lecture that the function of poetry is to obtain for everybody one kind of success at the limits of the autonomy of the will, to effect its purposes by other means, and that the limits of the autonomy of the will to which poetry is addressed are death and the barriers which prevent access to other minds. At the end of this poem, before the materials of construction of the great bridge ceased to be materials by which the literal bridge of history could be built and become the symbolic metals of social exchange, silver and gold. You notice that strange mutation. Bricks, stones, iron, and steel are materials of which bridges can be built, but silver and gold are not, right? There is a fierce mutation at that point to exhibit a further range of the failure of the human community to effect its communicative purposes. Social exchange subject to scarcity constitutes the crisis of other minds. If they're going to steal you blind, that's a crisis of other minds. Other minds which have claims, which poetry characteristically addresses. The will to build in time and the will of time to unbuild the bridge in history are both perpetual and impersonal. As William Butler Yeats says, all things fall and are built again. But the end of this poem brings to consciousness the will to build the self alone, the will of the possessive individual intent upon absolute difference, which breaks the bond among persons by hopelessly accumulative violence, the consequence of precisely the barriers of access to other minds, which poetic discourse is intended to overcome, that is to say, the theft and appropriation of the substance of exchange, which destroys the bridges of silver and gold. How then does this poem end? How in general do poems end? The beginning of poems requires a breaking of silence, and the turn to poetry with the intention of breaking that silence requires great need, and the will to explore such need by one more means, the last, the poem. In a sense, then, silence is broken by the will to truth. Now, this poem before us is driven by the will to build a communicative machine at the point of the failure of all such at hand. And inside that will to communicative possibility, there is a requirement of truth, which it seems is identical to communication as poetry understands it. The course of the poem through history, build it up, build it up, build it up, and through the inventory of secular materials, exhausts possibility. For the inventory, sticks, stones, iron, steel, bricks, clay, silver, gold, constitutes a totalization. What's totalization? Note it. Totalization is a rhetoric of inclusion common to short poems, which makes the bounding instance, silver and gold, of a class of things stand for every possible member of that class. The first and the last signify the whole, as in alpha and omega. In addition, each constructive program, build 8 times, is responded to by a truth. The truth of wear and rust and water and the betrayals of thieves who break the bridge of the social contract. As the poem proceeds, the universality of the truth of the vulnerability of all mortal constructions deepens until it has included the final enemy of human construction, human beings themselves. At the end of the poem, the building of the bridge has been shown to be impossible. In general, the requirement of poem ending is determined by the artifactual requirement of closure. Closure is the completion and recapitulation of all systems of discourse, thus completed from the silence that will follow, the cessation of speech. Closure has got to seal speech off from silence, all that noise out there, the terror of all that nothing. Closure, whatever bounds the poem, whatever stops it must also cauterize speech, lest it be invaded by all that opposes the sound of the human voice. In the case of this poem, the ending accomplishes the full discovery of a truth, the unqualified vulnerability of all secular structures. And that discovery is obtained simultaneously with the discovery of the impossibility of the construction it intended. No new element is introduced, no spiritual substance, just silver and gold, which people steal. Remember, the New Testament says if it's silver and gold, they can steal it. If it's the Word, you can't steal it. This is silver and gold. No spiritual substance is introduced. The children are admirable materialists. No spiritual substance which would enable the worker at construction to escape the realm of tragic scarcity. But as the truth of the vulnerability of structures is established, the children who play the singing game build their other game until it is complete, the game which the singing game is devised to enable. They do this, as I have pointed out, at the enabling moment of address to the lady, the apostrophe to which I have referred, as I will again. Telling truth to the lady. London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady. Telling truth to the lady makes it possible to play the game which has no song, the other game based in difference and order, which has, as the singing game does not have, winners and losers. The tug of war. The game accompanied by song, in this case, takes place in the moment after history which it undertakes to know, and the moment before experience which it serves to regulate. Such a space is sometimes called liminal space. Do you know that word? Liminal, L-I-M-I-N-A-L, liminal space, where the word liminal refers to the wide threshold between states of being, as between the inside and the outside of a house, or between sea and land. Liminal space, threshold space, the space of this song is what is sometimes meant by the categories of the aesthetic. The child said, as you will remember, the bridge is never mended, but it does not matter. It breaks my heart to that sentence. The bridge is never mended, but it does not matter. Why does it not matter to her? The question is one which I shall carry with me in the following lectures. Preliminarily, I say this to you. It's my feeling that the relationship to the lady, the will to tell her the truth, namely that no material substance will sustain the human will to communicability. It's my feeling that the relationship of the lady, the will to tell her the truth, constitutes the relationship to a deep social unconscious. Technically it would be called a semiotic, and is the condition of the life of any poem. The structure of any poem so constituted reproduces the structure of the social world in proportion to the actuality or authenticity of the relationship to the lady, who demands relationship in its fundamental form of truthful saying. Thus, the organization of the children is not a peculiarity of this poem or kind of poem, but is encoded as a principle of social organization which is reproduced or intended to be reproduced by the poem in all poems that are any good. Poetic representation, indeed authentic representation of all kinds, does not overcome scarcity. Does not overcome scarcity, the tragic economies of our life, but it regulates relationship to such scarcity, and thereby enables the other game, which we call social life, unless the school teacher or the police come out and put a stop to it.